Okay, welcome back. This is part 2 of our growth and development homework assignment 1, where we continue now with the practical applications of these terms that you now know, and we have given you a brief overview of what each means. Now we're going to a practical example. A parent wants to know whether placing her daughter Cindy in the under 15A hockey team is a good idea, given that she's only 12 years old. Support your claim as to whether or not the placement of a daughter to a higher team should take place. And again, you would have read these resources to make your decision. The third year module is the NQF level 7 module, so it requires you to understand the basic knowledge, terms and definitions, to read a case study and then apply that information. So always ask yourself the question, what does this article that I'm reading mean practically whilst you're learning? Okay, first calculate Cindy's percent of adult stature, of her parents' adult stature, given that her mom's height is 176 and her dad's height is 188. So I've done it here. She's 160 centimeters at the moment, her mom's 176, her dad's 188, so her predicted height is 175.5. So based on her percent of peak height velocity, she's at 91% peak height velocity. And as we know, if someone's at 91%, that means that they're already into maturity, and they are within at least 1 year of peak height velocity. She'll probably be starting her menstruation, and she's already had breast budding, and she's already increased her estrogen release and so forth. So it's probably not surprising that she is an average maturer based on the growth and development data, males being at 14 plus minus and females being at 12 years old. So she's an average maturer, and the fact that she must be placed or that the opportunity to place her into a higher team means that maybe some of her peers are late maturers, or her actual movement skill ability is pretty good, and that is why this question is being posed. So if we look at the CDC charts and her weight and her height, we did not look at weight, but we know that she's an average maturer, so she will be getting all those specific musculoskeletal changes. Her sigmoid growth will increase, so she will have muscle mass improvements, but as I mentioned already in the previous video, she will also have increased mass, fat mass gain, and secondary sex characteristics coming on. But the question is, should she be put into that higher team as a 12-year-old, be put into a 15-year-old team, 3-year gap? So what I would look at is to see, first of all, we don't know her weight, but we need to check her weight, and she should be between 30 to 55 kgs at present, and her height, based on her height compared to her peers, she's 75 to 90%. She's probably 75 to 90% taller than most are in her peer group, most of her peers. So that's probably another reason why they've talent ID'd her to put in the under 15 team, because she is slightly taller than most of her peers. However, the question is, should she move on? Discuss her height percent of adult stature and your hypothesis in terms of peak height velocity curve, and hence her musculoskeletal, cardiovascular, adipose and endocrine development status. Okay, so let's look at her then height and her weight compared to that of a 15-year-old. So if we had to take her actual height and put it into the CDC charts, you will notice that she is at she's within the 25th to 50th percentile. That means that in the under 15 team, 75 to 50 to 75% of her peers will be taller than her. So that's not necessarily a problem, but the problem comes in is the amount of force application, strength application, power application required to keep up with the under 15 team. So hence a further analysis is required to actually look at what is her strength status at the moment and what are her sport specific skills. So before she gets placed into that under 15 team, another factor to consider to see whether her legs and her upper body and her core are strong enough to actually handle the stress of moving up into the under 15 hockey team needs to be assessed. Okay, although I said hockey is a non-contact sport, there can be quite a lot of contact in that sport, so we would have to see what is her weight at the present and how does that compare to the average under 15-year-old as well. And then obviously it is important to have a team-based approach to making this choice, and you would get a sports psychologist on board to see whether this 12-year-old is actually mentally ready to deal with what 15-year-olds would discuss and debate, and how their mentality would be different to that of her 12-year-old peers. Another thing to do, which a lot of parents and coaches sometimes forget, is to actually ask Cindy herself what she thinks about whether the move is important to go to the under 15 team. But if we think about under 12 versus under 15, there's quite a large gap change there of 3 years, and also it moves from more of a junior primary school setting to a high school setting, and hence at the end of the day personally from our side the answer should be, let's wait at least a year and reevaluate the situation and see how her peers change in dimension and body weight and so forth compared to her, and the same goes for the following year. So let's wait for her to reach 13 years old and 14 years old and then see. But she obviously might have talent, so let's continue with the training that will keep her in the game. Okay, so the next question refers to use the attached CDC cutoff, height, weight and BMI growth curves, and discuss the health implications of the following children. Okay, Nandi's 8 years old, she's 35 kgs and she's 150 centimeters tall, 1.5 meters tall. So the BMI placement placed her into 25 to 50th percentile ranking, which puts her at a low risk or no risk for obesity or for being overweight or obese. And however, if we look at her height and weight, she would be definitely taller than most of her peers in her class, and heavier, slightly heavier than most of her peers in her class, and that could just be based on her structure and genetics, and also possibly her maturational age. But again, 8 years old, so probably more due to genetics, height and weight differences. Sipo 21.22 BMI category for 15-year-old places him into the 75th to 85th percentile. Maybe a warning sign that he could be moving over into the overweight category, the 85th percentile and over. But further analysis will be needed to verify that statement. And then weight, he would be heavier than most of his peers and somewhat taller than most of his peers, and this can come into the type of body type the individual is, whether they're ectomorph, mesomorph, or endomorph. Further analysis would be needed to give the specific health recommendations, and I'll talk about that additionally now. So again, the question, although seemingly straightforward, requires additional analysis. Okay, Yaku, he is 28.54 for an 8-year-old. That places him in the obesity category, which has many predisposing factors. We have had in the past at our biokinetic center a 6-year-old that came in that weighed 62 kg. So this is actually a possibility, and of course that individual is in need of intervention. So again, just looking at this more in depth, further analysis using skin fold measurements, because they are more accurate than BMI. BMI is just a warning system in place, but I would take skin fold measures, look at the food consumption and work in a line with a dietitian, and then of course look at the exact type of physical activity the individuals are participating in and their sedentary behavior, which you can either do via pedometer, accelerometer, or a questionnaire to the mom or dad. And the same goes for Sipo, and the same goes for Yaku. Okay. Again, for children starting off with these problems at such a young age, your likelihood of developing problems such as joint problems, arthritis, psychological, low self-esteem, cardiovascular, arteriosclerosis, and physiological diabetes is augmented. So we want to put an intervention in place. Okay, off to our next question. Gareth's mom wants to remove him from your athletics team because she sees that her son is not performing and his peers are just getting better. Gareth is 14 years old and all of them are 14 years old, but you as the coach, luckily you've been keeping these peak height velocity curve measures as you've gone along. So what could be going on here? Please explain this phenomenon to the mom. So let's look at this. So manner is what you would have read in Bailey as well, page 49 and form 5 for Bailey, and we can see that the average age for an youth child to reach peak height velocity in males is 14 years old. So Gareth would be a definite outlier who has started early. Not impossible. Some people can go through maturation early, but that is quite early for a young boy. So it would seem because Gareth was such an early maturer, with the average being 14 years old, he is 4 to 5 years ahead of his peers. So even though he might not be, the changes in growth might not be as much as his peers, and he might actually end up being quite a lot shorter than them, at the end of the day, his motor, neural patterns and his testosterone release and his growth in his cardiovascular system and so forth would have been better than his peers. So strength, power, speed, and agility would have been better up until the age of 14, where his peers started to catch up. So the problem with being an early maturer is that these youth, Gareth for example, get a false impression of success and sometimes always succeed. So they only know how to win. Whereas they're not winning because they're actually good. A lot of the time they're winning because they have their body size increase over their peers. So sometimes they slack in their training, or they focus on using their body weight as opposed to skills to overcome their opponents. And that is where the coach has to make sure they put the same sized weight type individuals together and focus on skill-based training versus body weight training. Coaches often overlook the effect of maturation on children and mistakenly choose better players who only seem better because they're closer to adult-like maturation. So as I've shown you that picture, this is possibly what Gareth could look like in terms of compared to his peers. This could be the scenario of what Gareth looks like compared to his peers. So obviously a coach thinking that this guy has reached the genetic jackpot and he's going to be taller than everyone, he's going to continue like that, his peers could actually end up overtaking him altogether. Okay. So due to the technical and tactical focus versus body weight, because they did not have the body weight advantage, again taking body weight into account as opposed to focusing on technical and tactical skills, which is what smaller players might do at that age if they do not drop out, where the coach is not aware that the smaller players are also a disadvantage. But in terms of Gareth, he was an early maturer. So hence in some places like New Zealand, they've tried to overcome this. Just as a practical example for you guys, as I've shown you online, here is the example with the rugby union, where they actually divide the children into teams based on minimum and maximum weight categories, as opposed to this scenario where absolutely disadvantaged scenario with a child being placed against someone who is clearly much bigger than them. Where's that picture? Here we go. And this can cause injury, neck damage, back damage, self-esteem problems, and so forth for everyone that's playing with that child. And then obviously when he gets when his peers start to catch up, he will not have this advantage of using his body weight as he is now. Okay, so just refer to that as an example of this. Okay, so basically that was the first set of questions, practical questions that you were posed with. So you should know the definitions, how they apply specifically to the adolescent phase and what that means. So what I'm going to do in the next question is go through really the objectives as well in a little bit more depth, so that you know and feel confident that objectives 1 to 8 are also covered. If you have any questions about what has been covered in terms of early versus late maturation, as we can see here, Gareth, Todd and Tim, and the fix. Please do not hesitate to ask. In terms of placement within a team based on growth related changes, how to measure peak height velocity, and how to measure parents, a percentage of adult parent height, and then of course using your CDC charts and calculating BMI. Please do not hesitate to ask me.